Right, I'd like to welcome Mr. Troy Wright and Ms. Judith Coombes. We do have Mr. Marsden on telephone, but we'll get to him in a... Ms. Alex Marsden, we'll get to her in a few minutes. Could you please each state your full name and job title and either swear an oath or an affirmation, please? Starting with you, or maybe Ms. Coombes, yep.
Yes, I'm Judith Coombes. I'm the
Could
President...
you talk a bit closer to the mic so we can hear you? That's it.
I'm Judith Coombes, President of the New South Wales branch of the Australian Museums and Galleries Association. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
I'm Troy Wright, Assistant General Secretary at the Public Service Association of New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Now we've got Ms. Marsden. I'd like to welcome Ms. Alex Marsden, who's joining us by teleconference from Canberra. My name is Robert Borsak and I'm the Chair of the Select Committee for this inquiry, just in case you didn't know. You are appearing alongside...
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I could ask you to perhaps yourself lean a bit closer to the microphone.
Oh, well done.
Am I having a problem with your ears, Evan?
Okay. My name is Ms. Alex Marsden. I'm the National Director of the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, and I make the following affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms. Marsden. I should hope so. Questions? Opening statement, sorry. Would someone like to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you. I will make the opening statement. First of all, we welcome the opportunity to appear before this committee. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people upon whose land you are meeting and the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people from where I'm speaking in Canberra. I would remind the committee of our previous submissions and a number of public statements made by the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, AMAGA for short. Who is AMAGA? We are the national organisation of peak advocacy body for museums and galleries throughout Australia. We are independent of government. We are a membership body. We're membership-led. And we have expertise, we look at standards, we have ethics, and we provide professional development and a lot of advocacy. So that is what we do. This is how we operate. We have branches in every state and territory. The New South Wales branch is one of our largest and oldest. And, of course, Judith Coombes is here as president of that branch. We also have national networks of expertise. My background, I've been 5 years as the National Director. I'm a historian, museums and cultural advisor, design thinker, policy developer. I have expertise in built heritage objects and collections. My colleague, who you do see today, Judith Coombes, has worked in museum profession in New South Wales for over 30 years and has experience in delivering regional programs and support and was a senior manager at the Powerhouse for 16 years. We welcome the state government's recent announcement that it would keep Powerhouse at the Ultimo site as well as a new site at Parramatta. We would note that this has been a recommendation made by many over the years, including AMAGA. We note also new grants programs announced and delivered by the state government since the first Legislative Committee inquiry some years ago, so that's excellent too. What we want to see: substantial, appropriate investment in the Powerhouse Ultimo site. We want to see the development of a formal New South Wales Museum and Gallery strategy that's coherent and funded, and especially at this time of compounding disasters. We want to see better government leadership, transparency and accountability. And final statement is we are ready to provide ongoing advice and consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wright?
Thank you, Chair. The Public Service Association of New South Wales appears before the committee today as a legitimate and somewhat unique stakeholder in the museums and cultural institutions of New South Wales, as the voice and representative of hundreds of staff employed within them. Our members across the New South Wales public sector frequently receive unfair treatment and labelling by politicians and media alike, being referred to as backroom bureaucrats who are a burden on the taxpayer. This is particularly not the case for the employees in this sector, who are the curators, historians, guides, researchers, librarians and technicians responsible for not only preserving and recording the history and culture of our state, but to educate the next generation about it. At the time of its establishment, this inquiry was rightly primarily concerned with the proposed relocation of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences from its current Ultimo location to its proposed new building at Parramatta. Whilst the relocation was kiboshed by the government only 3.5 weeks ago, the chaos that this proposal had engendered continues. The powerhouse, as it's colloquially known, has been for months managing a threat on two fronts: the impacts of the COVID pandemic on its revenue and the festering uncertainty of its relocation and the impacts of that on employees and operations in the interim. As at today, whilst a public announcement has been made that the Ultimo location is to remain in situ for the foreseeable future, our members are still awaiting an announcement from local management and are in limbo as to what plans can be made for exhibitions in the future. A few months ago, museum management implemented what our members considered to be a premature and nonsensical partial closure of the current facility, just as the doors were set to reopen to the public after the lifting of COVID restrictions. Notwithstanding the announcement of the retention of the site, redesigned work duties over the past few months of primarily cataloguing and archiving the museum's exhibits has continued as though the relocation is still on the agenda. We have no clarity regarding the anticipated opening of the Castle Hill facility, nor the timetable, purpose and functionality of the Parramatta site. Our members are not resistant to change and are in fact excited by both the possibilities for and the renewed interest in their organisation that has been expressed to the public debate regarding the future of their institution. But the closure of Ultimo was always viewed cynically, and the change management plan that was implemented has been ill-considered and poorly communicated at almost every stage. The nature and seeming hastiness of the announcement a few weeks ago has only fueled the feeling that our members' lack of confidence regarding the bona fides of the entire move may have been well-founded. The situation at the MAS, however, is only a small sideshow now to the broader crisis confronting the entire industry. Our 5 state institutions have always cross-subsidised their operation through their own revenue streams. However, this has dried up, leaving the sector, according to our calculations, up to a collective $91 million in deficit this year. Whilst hit as hard as other sectors in the economy with a downturn in trade, they've been excluded from the federal government's JobKeeper package. Further, the state government has failed to provide any additional assistance as the Victorian Andrews government has deemed appropriate. A historical pattern of casualisation of the workforce means that job losses and reduced functionality appear a likely outcome across the 5 government-operated institutions without some targeted relief. Our submission made 2 recommendations which were designed with the relocation of the MAS in mind, but remain relevant today. Firstly, that the 5 institutions that are subject of the inquiry, being the Sydney Living Museum, State Library, MAAS, Australian Museum and the New South Wales Art Gallery, develop plans to take their exhibitions regionally as separate or combined roadshows of sort. This would not only increase the accessibility for residents of regional New South Wales to their collections, but provide stimulus to those economies in terms of jobs and tourism. Secondly, the new Parramatta site, whose arguments in favour have been well aired over several years, whether it be established or wherever it may be established, be considered as being a shared space between all these organisations and not exclusive for the MAAS alone, notwithstanding that the size and scale of its collection could fill it many times over. This would again increase access to cultural institutions for residents of Western Sydney, but also serve to be a flexible and ever-changing space that would consequently attract frequent visitors. On behalf of the PSA's members, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to appear today and wish you well on your important work. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Now, I thought there would have been a collective breath of a sigh of relief, but you surprised me when you say that there's a feeling of chaos continuing. Okay? I thought there were 99 or 95 casual workers who are on the chopping block. What?
Who now aren't. We've
I
been given
know,
that advice
but
today.
the witness said the chaos continues. So I just
know, I
want,
understand.
so I'd just like
Make
to
that clear.
pursue that a little bit.
Thank you. There's both. There was a collective sigh of relief
Yep.
that their current site would be retained,
I acknowledge
but there is still an enormous confusion among our membership, and I spoke to our major delegate as recently as yesterday because there's been no announcement from local management about what the plan going forward is. They learned, as we all learnt in the newspaper on the 5th of July, that the announcement had been made, and there's been no communication either prior to that or subsequent to that. It makes it impossible for an organisation like the MAAS to plan for the people that we've got as members that plan the exhibitions and engage, various.
So Ms. Havilah didn't come to the staff, assemble them.
There is apparently a staff meeting set for next week where they are hoping some announcements will be made, but there's been no communication to my knowledge from my delegate yesterday to any of the staff about what's happened and what's going to happen. And like I said, a couple of weeks ago, just around the time the COVID restrictions were lifted, I think it was early May, within a week of that, and the staff were very excited, okay, we're going to reopen and run for a few years and it's going to be good. Local management announced, well, okay, we're not going to completely reopen. We're going to do a partial closure, which we found very curious and odd at that time in particular. And the majority of staff would be, some of the casuals were going to be laid off who were the guides, you're correct.
Yep.
And also the remainder of the staff would be engaged, rather than opening the premises or the museum to the public, would be engaged in cataloguing and archiving the current collection. Now, they're still doing that, and they're wondering why they're still doing that. So again, it's just a very confusing situation for our members at the moment.
Just wondered if I could ask a follow-up. This morning, my colleague, Mr. Secord, asked the Minister about the limbo on exhibitions, and we were assured by the Minister and other witnesses in our first session that was mistaken and that there had been no disruption, and that the museum site at Ultimo was sort of operating as normal, and then we got this long rundown of exhibitions. So I'm interested to hear you mention feedback from the staff on the ground that their experience has been that there's been a limbo on exhibitions. I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more detail on what that might look like and how that has been for the staff on the site, and them sort of trying to do their jobs as best they can.
Look, there's been enormous anxiety among our members for a significant period of time since this announcement was made, particularly around the change management plan. We have been pressing museum management about, okay, how are you going to manage the transition from your current site to the new site? They were only willing to release that in staggered parts, and the first staggered part of that was announced in May, which was we're going to close half of the museum to the public because we're going to slowly move all that exhibition space out, and we're going to catalogue it, and we're going to let all those casual guides go. But then we were still saying, hang on, what's going to happen? What's the timetable for the new building? What's the closure of Ultimo? When do you have to be out? Where are our staff going to be in between? What are they going to be doing? None of that was provided. So there's been this anxiety right up until the July announcement. Now that anxiety is replaced on twofold, in that no announcement's been made locally about what's going to happen. There is one exhibition, for example, at the moment that's been opened up, but that was booked many, many months ago. You don't just put on an exhibition next week. You have to plan it months, if not years, in advance. So there's one major exhibition now, and people are excited about that, but the anxiety's probably been replaced about concern about the financial situation of the museum, given that visitor numbers are downturned, both because of uncertainty about its current move and whether it's open or not, and secondly, the pandemic as well. So, it's almost like one concern about their jobs and their security of their jobs has been replaced with another, and we'd really like and appreciate, and we hope it happens next week, some sort of certainty and direction given by local management.
Now, this morning there was a rebadging of it, saying that it'll be one museum on 4 sites. And we found from Ms. Havilah that the headquarters or her offices will be at the Parramatta site. Were you, or is any communication of when staff will have to relocate and what will happen?
There has been no communication either prior to the announcement on 4th of July or since that announcement about when any relocation, what would go, when it would go, who would go. Any of that has been planned out as far as we know.
Were you aware that her officers
No.
would...
I can
so you found out,
I don't think I wasn't aware. I can check and take it on notice whether our members were aware.
It'd be great if you could take on notice whether there's been any consultation at all about the prospect of the sort of HQ of the powerhouse being located in Parramatta.
I'd be 90% sure there hasn't been, but I'm happy to take that on notice
So
and
you said
confirm.
there was no clarity on the Castle Hill storage site, the Discovery Centre. How many staff actually are employed there?
I'd have to take that on notice. It's nowhere near the number that are employed at Ultimo. It's a small amount. I understood it mainly to be people concerned in sort of storeman or store person capacities, but I'd have to confirm that. I'll take that on notice as well.
Okay, thank you. David?
Well, my question is to any one of the witnesses, but it's probably more to Ms Coombes and Ms Marsden. The government has said that it's pulling together a business case for the Ultimo site and also a master plan for the Ultimo site, and doing that throughout the balance of the year. How important do you think it is for the government to consult with key stakeholders when developing a master plan for something as critical as the future of the powerhouse?
I think it's terribly important. I think museums are all about communities, and there's a very large number of experts in this field. And Amaga is the peak body. There's a lot of professional museum staff in Australia and overseas, and as well as there's lots of very informed community and council stakeholders. And to hear this morning that, the business case and master plan were well underway was quite surprising, since it's only been a few weeks since the announcement that we were keeping the powerhouse.
Ms Marsden?
Yes, of course, I support what Judy is saying. It's absolutely essential that there's strong consultation, more and more so than there always should have been consultation, but even more nowadays. It's actually good design practice, it's good community practice, it creates resilient and invested communities and stronger results all around. And as I say, Amaga, and there are many other organisations and individuals that are able to provide expert advice as well as the communities in the affected areas.
You'd almost think it was one of the lessons to learn from the history of the powerhouse to date, that unilateral decisions made by government about critical cultural institutions can be quite damaging and hard to land, and you're much better off consulting. Can you think of any examples where that's been done well that we could look to? You don't have to limit yourself to New South Wales if that's the problem.
There doesn't seem to have been the level of conflict and division in other states and potentially in the UK with new developments that there have been here. But I think that's because closing down a world-class, internationally known museum is not commonly done. In fact, we are not really aware of any cases. We build new museums, we know about the Tate and the V&A and the Guggenheim. We expand, and we're aware of, growing communities and community needs, and we expand. The Louvre in Abu Dhabi, but we're not really aware of examples where this has caused so much division.
And in terms of consultation on establishing a new institution, anything good and worthwhile takes time, and you have steps forward and steps backwards. And I'm thinking about Alice Springs with the new Indigenous Cultural Arts Centre. There is a lot of consultation, there is division, there is actually going to come up with good outcomes there. It just takes time and good heart and willingness to listen.
And that time and detailed consultation, would you think be an important part of developing a master plan and the future of something as critical as the Ultimo site?
Yes, absolutely. And you can look at not only museum development principles, you can look at design principles, all of it. Absolutely critical.
And Mr. Wright, what about consultation with the workforce? In some ways the workforce are people who have, critical knowledge about it. Has there been any outreach?
Yes, workforce there are two reasons for that. One is that they actually have expert advice they can give. which is critical. And the other is that it's going to impact them. So again, it's both in terms of their expertise and also them as human beings and cultural workers.
I see Mr. Wright nodding.
I thank you. I used the term chaotic in my opening reference, and it's not just chaos now. It was during that period leading up to May in particular. We agree. Consultation is not just an important thing for the planning of the museums. It's also an industrial right that our members enjoy, and that hasn't been occurring. When the announcement was made early May that they would close the current site would be partially closed, we had to lodge a dispute in the Industrial Relations Commission because we hadn't been consulted about that. Our members hadn't been told what was happening. We were told that 95 casuals, who are the guides, if you like, I think they're called customer service operators or something highfalutin like that, the guides were going to be laid off, and we hadn't seen a change management plan. That's our industrial right. A change management plan should be set out by any organisation. So this is where we're at, this is where we've got to get to, this is how we're going to get there. They hadn't done that. And during the proceedings in the Commission, they came out and said, look, we haven't done change management plan because we haven't done the rest of the change management plan. We can't do it in little parts. Or eventually they said they would do it in little parts. And I found it astounding that something like the planning of the workforce, where they would be, who would be where, what they would be doing in the interim, all that sort of stuff, hadn't been thought through. Yet contrast that with the announcements that were being made in the media at the time from government and high that this was a dead certainty to occur. Yet at the ground level, there didn't seem to be the actual planning or thought process put into it. And we found that very difficult to reconcile at the time because, you had these statements that it was a dead certainty and then confusion on the ground.
Well, that sort of pretty much typified this whole process, really, hasn't it? From going right back to the thought bubble in 2015 and the ongoing inquiries that we originally ran, and now that we're back to it. I mean, I think I heard in evidence this morning that, and I can't remember, I think it might have been from Ms. Havilah and or the Minister, that what they were thinking about doing, because they didn't want to tell us what they were going to do with the Ultimo site, was actually one of the options in their original or their version 2 or 3 business plan. And maybe that's one reason why they've come up with it so quickly. Can I just...
Sorry.
No, I just want to go somewhere else for a second, and it's forgotten in all the discussions we're having in relation to the very important site at Ultimo and Parramatta, etc. But Ms. Coombes or Ms. Marsden, have you got any comment to make in relation to this government's track record on regional museums? It was very much a part of our original inquiries years ago, and my good colleague here, Mr. Franklin, I know did secure some money and also some improvement in the way the government was looking after these institutions. But I think that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit recently.
Thank you. I might answer briefly first and then hand over to Judy Coombes. I think it's recognised that there isn't a good enough comprehensive museum strategy in New South Wales. One that focuses not only on regional museums but also the role of the state institutions, how they all interact together is really quite critical to understand. We can see, lifting our eyes up a little bit to the Commonwealth level, the diabolical impact of not having a decent cultural policy for museums and galleries at Commonwealth level, okay? So you've got thought bubbles, you've got bits and pieces coming out everywhere, you haven't got integrated approaches at all, you certainly haven't got something you could integrate with a decent state policy and local government policy. We can see the fact that local government associations come out unanimously calling for a well-funded and coherent museum strategy. So despite some welcome advances at the state government level in some funding programs, we're still waiting and still advocating very, very strongly for a good regional museum strategy.
Can I, perhaps, if you don't mind, Chair, if I might just...
I think Ms. Coombes wanted to respond.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah.
I just want to note that I also have an opening statement, and I don't know if you've got time to
Oh, I beg your pardon.
do my
No,
whole
certainly.
statement. I might, because we're on the regional museums, I might do that part first.
Yeah.
Actually, I did listen to the session this morning, and often there was a reference to it's a government decision. It's a government decision. And I just want to make the note that within the museum profession, we don't see museums and cultural institutions as belonging to the government, that they belong to the people of New South Wales. You know, people have donated their precious collections and, for the display to the people of New South Wales and to grow and develop these, more than a century-old institutions. And, governments change and staff at a museum change, but they're really these solid, organisations within the community that are very highly valued, as we've seen in this recent shift around the powerhouse. But in terms of regional museums, although there's been some additional grant programs in recent years for our regional communities, there are still considerable risks to very significant collections and to local museums, especially after the bushfires and the continuing pandemic. Capital and grant funding should be increased and an annual cultural subsidy to local government be considered. And this has come straight from our members. There have also been media reports recently revealing that expert advice regarding arts grants were on occasion overruled by the Minister, which risks destroying the trust between government and regional stakeholders. We're very willing to work with other stakeholders to improve and promote regional museums, galleries and historical societies, to focus on the quality, services and sustainability of smaller organisations that play such an important role for communities and tourism in New South Wales regions. The New South Wales Library and the Victorian model for regional museums could be useful models. Expertise from the big institutions should be shared and exchanged in a more structured, well-funded program. The current pandemic provides a great opportunity to focus on growing regional tourism, but this takes coordination and funding.
Thank you, Ms. Coombes.
Ms. Coombes, you raised it about political interference in the grants process. So what was the impact on, I guess, smaller galleries and isolated galleries across the state who put a lot of time and energy into the comprehensive grants process?
That's right.
What was the response from then when they discovered that there had been blatant political interference by the Minister and the Deputy Premier?
Well, there's a lot of disappointment, but I guess there have been other media reports about other grant programs that have also been influenced politically, and so it is a loss of trust, I think.
But we should have an inquiry into that.
But because small organisations are very, very time constrained and people are volunteers, that to write an application and to get to then jump through all the hoops would have been quite taxing.
It's very taxing, and a lot of these organisations are run by volunteers. And you know that the regions have suffered from drought and then bushfire and now the pandemic, and there's a lot of distress out there.
Well, one last question. On the pandemic, what has been because we hear about the drop-off of visitation and galleries in Sydney and performing institutions closing, but what's been the impact on rural and regional galleries and performance spaces and museums?
Yes, well, it's been a major impact, of course, and a lot of places had to close their doors, and that impacts on their income. And a lot of them rely on fairly, modest income that comes in through the door. But that's what they rely on.
What's your feeling for the number that, in fact, are there some that may never reopen their doors?
That's quite possible.
Do you have any examples that you could provide that?
I can take that on notice.
Thank you. Thank you.
I might just wanted to ask a follow-up question, either of Ms. Marsden or perhaps Ms. Coombes. In your opening remarks, Ms. Marsden, you mentioned the need for a coherent museum and gallery strategy in New South Wales. I think that's been a recommendation of a previous inquiry in relation to this issue, and you mentioned it again specifically and the benefit that it might bring, for example, in terms of regional galleries. I just wanted to ask you a little bit to elaborate on why you think that is such an important strategy for the government to develop generally. Like what kind of additional benefits would investment in that strategy development bring in terms of the decisions that the government is making in relation to, for example, the powerhouse?
I think.
Thank you. It's in terms of a strategy, it's a bit like, look at other industries. There are industry policies for all sorts of things, and no one questions that, really, because it does provide a framework for prioritising. It does provide a framework for consultation, coming up with some very, very good proposals and ideas. It does give you a sense of the future and how the stepping stones to get to an imaginative future that people are invested in. So So for all those reasons, a decent funded coherent strategy is actually quite critical. For example, you've got digital access to collections should be a key part of it. So you've got some ad hoc digitisation, which is great, but wouldn't it be terrific to actually be prioritising the digitisation of critical collections around the state rather than just what happens to be needed because of a move or because of some ad hoc funding and grants. So digitising collections will be one aspect of a coherent strategy. Another aspect of a coherent strategy would be we're heading into compounding disaster seasons, okay? It's just a happening thing. I convene a national emergency response roundtable for national organisations, cultural organisations. I've just come from convening that one today. How are we preparing for a compounding season coming up, but we're still going to be having COVID reactions? How do we actually get a coherent communications program out to people so they need to do their disaster planning? All of that could be folded within a framework, within a strategy. It could be funded. It could be communicated well. So there's some of the key examples of what you would do. You'd actually start linking disaster preparedness with other parts of government delivery agencies so that you've actually got some coherence there. They're the examples that I would put forward, and they're the examples I would love to see the New South Wales government pick up and develop.
Also, in terms of strategy, we've seen a lot of decisions come out of government around Sydney Modern, the archives and Sydney Living Museums amalgamation, and around the powerhouse. But all these new projects have not been in one strategy document for museums and galleries. And in most other areas of government, we have, 10-year plans or 20-year plan, and museums and galleries are long-term, how we've talked about, many are over a century old. We really need a longer-term strategy, and we don't have a history museum in New South Wales. The powerhouse stopped collecting social history under Dawn Casey in around 2010, but prior to that, social history was a very strong collecting area for the powerhouse, and it was a very strong exhibition focus for all of its life up until then. And so, that discussion has been raised by Sydney historians and curators many times, and it hasn't emerged in any kind of overall strategy.
I just had one additional question, perhaps for you, Ms. Coombes, although Ms. Marsden may wish to contribute. I think I recall you used to work at the Powerhouse Museum,
did.
Is that right? So, it was mentioned in Ms. Marsden's opening statement, and you've alluded to it as well, that in order to turn the Powerhouse Ultimo into the sort of fantastic museum that we all hope it is, and that the Minister has articulated a vision for, substantial investment is going to need to be provided. We know that. We know that we've heard evidence that a business case was prepared in 2014 that put that figure at somewhere between $300 and $500 million. From the Mass Board. Did you have a sense of, putting both your experience at the House and your expert hat on, what is the sort of monetary figure that you might be looking at in order to achieve that goal for the Ultimo site?
I think it very much depends on how much you do. That 2014 business case was quite major. It was, changing the whole Harwood building, the Stage 1 tram shed building, and also the RAN building, the 1988 adaptive reuse. So there's no reason why that sum should now be current, because saying saving the powerhouse is an assumption by many people that means saving the 1988 award-winning adaptive reuse, and also the whole precinct, the heritage precinct, which includes the tram shed. I'd just like to note that Minister Harwin did say that building was 1980s this morning, and I did check also this morning that the perimeter walls of that building are original turn-of-the-century tram shed. So I think it depends whether it's renewing the air conditioning and the interiors and great new exhibitions, or it's significant work, including Mr. Harwin mentioned the theatre. That's a very different project than just stabilising, improving the conditions there.
And do you have a view on what would be preferable? If you were advising the minister directly, and in a way you are through our proceedings. You know, there are clearly a range of options,
Yes.
but just what would you sort of think might be the best way forward?
Well, I have been able to talk to Ms Havilah several times in the last few weeks, so that's been wonderful, consultation. And the ideas of maintaining the industrial history of the original powerhouse is really important, and that's why we're maintaining those large objects there. They look really fantastic. I hope they can maintain the live steam operation, because that was one of the real innovations at the time the museum opened, and we have spent a lot of time and money maintaining that over the years. And the idea of the creative precincts has been around for quite some time as well, because as the representative from Sydney City Council said, you've got UTS with its fashion architecture and design schools. You have the TAFE, who do a lot of design and technology work as well. You have Sydney University and right up to the hospital. So that, and the collections there at the moment, in that basement of the Harwood building, there's around 300,000 of the small objects. Now, the plan had been to move all those to Castle Hill. My view is that it's better to have collections where the people are. And, you know, I was responsible for managing that collection at the Harwood building, and it was a very active space. It's not just like a dead museum collection. We're constantly taking tours through researchers, student groups, artists, and curators could easily access that there. Castle Hill is a great site, but it's always been very difficult to get visitors to go there. It is an hour's drive from the city. It's 25 minutes drive from Parramatta. And so there was...
Might run into the police minister on the way.
I would just,
yeah.
leave that.
Sorry, was it a
No,
question?
don't worry.
It's Alex Marsden here. If I could just add something, and that is that, thank you, there's been a worrying trend over the last decade nationally in various states and territories about investing a bit more in bricks and mortar and cutting staff and programs. Okay, and that's actually what makes museums live as well. So, you know, get rid of the efficiency dividend for a start, which is just compounding budget cuts, and invest in brilliant, you know, support for the staff, more staff, fantastic education, collecting history and communications programs, education programs. You know, that's what I would love to see, not that always sacrificed on other altars.
Where are you on efficiency dividends for museums?
Where am I on the efficiency dividend? I've been where I've always been, and have advocated very strongly against efficiency dividends. It's in all the statements I've made, in the submission. I've got there's information there, compounding budget cuts, etc.
And you point out the particular damage that efficiency dividends do.
Particular damage to cultural institutions who you know, that's where they haven't got a lot of fat to cut. It's actually staff and programs which have to go. It's a ridiculous thing nowadays, efficiency dividend, absolutely ridiculous.
My final question is to you, Mr. Wright. You said in your opening statement that these state-run cultural institutions have some of the highest rates of casual employment in the public sector. Can you give an indication of what those rates are and whether or not the government's willing to sit down with the union and work out a strategy to provide more permanent and secure employment?
The uncertainty about the powerhouse over the last few years has led to a reticence to address that, certainly at that institution. We hope to deal with that now. I was surprised when the proposed layoffs were to occur in May that we had people that were employed casually there in the guides roles for more than 10 years. They'd been and working for full-time hours, if you like, and it's very unusual in the public sector for that to occur, to be honest. That had been a creep, if you like, that had probably got under our radar, and then the uncertainty about the institution itself had led to it, you know, becoming almost institutionalised practice. It's less so at some of the other places. It's certainly less so at the State Library and the Art Gallery. Australian Museum, as you know, is currently closed for renovation, so they had a bit of a period, but I'm happy to get some numbers where I can about the levels of casual employment. They would certainly be higher than most, if not all, other public sector agencies, and usually in that customer service front. Can I just add on that other point, though, as well, about the proposal about renovations and things? I was meeting with the delegates a couple of weeks ago, and it's a minor anecdote, and they joked something about being on buckets, and I didn't know what they meant. Apparently the roof horrifically leaks at Powerhouse, and I raised that because it's probably indicative rather than the issue in itself of a general neglect of that building. If the roof's leaking, God knows what else is wrong with it, and therefore we have a triple threat. We have a building at Ultimo that may be in a state of bit of decay and will require a significant capital spend to get it up to scratch. You have a repurposing of Ultimo potentially, and you have a third issue, which is a massive drop in revenue on account of the pandemic. So no doubt I think there's a difficult time ahead without some strong government intervention with the organisation.
I have one last question, Mr. Chair, and this may go to Ms. Coombes. Have you been following the recent controversy at the MCA involving staff and the leadership at the MCA?
I've only read a few articles about that.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I was just checking to see if you'd had any knowledge or any insights. Ms. Marsden, do you have any knowledge or any insights into that?
No, I don't. Like Judith, I've only read a few articles. I haven't been able to follow it up.
Okay. Thank you.
Good try though, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at least they could give that new white box a wash. That would be a nice thing at the MCA. It's looking a mess. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming today. I note that there are a number of questions taken on notice. The committee's resolved that answers to questions taken on notice be returned within 21 days, and the Secretariat will be in contact with you in relation to those questions. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ms. Marsden.
Thank you very much for your forbearance over the phone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.